The cold was not just a feeling. It was a weight. It pressed on Cora's chest until her breath came in shallow, smoky bursts. Each one a small theft from the frozen air of the Wyoming high country. It was 1870, or perhaps 1871. She had lost track. Time had smeared into a gray misery of walking. She had been moving for 6 days since fleeing Laramie, heading west into the mountains where she hoped the men hunting her would not follow. She had eaten roots and a handful of bitter berries that made her stomach cramp. Now, she was hollow. The hunger was a living thing inside her, a creature with claws that had torn all warmth and reason from her body. The sun was not yet visible, but a pale, bruised light leaked over the eastern peaks, revealing the cruel majesty of the land. It was a place of giants, of stone cliffs and pines so tall they scraped the low-hanging clouds. And she was a fly crawling across it, about to be crushed. Her shoes, thin slippers meant for carpets and parlor floors, had disintegrated. She had wrapped her feet in strips of her petticoat, but the rags were frozen stiff, caked in mud and blood. Each step was a fresh agony, a sharp spike of ice driving into her soles. She had followed a game trail, reasoning that deer knew where to find water. The trail had led her down into a small, sheltered bowl, a crease in the mountainside protected from the worst of the wind. She smelled it before she saw it. Wood smoke. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of her hunger. Smoke meant men, and men, in Cora's experience, were a specific and terrible kind of danger. The man in Laramie, the one who kept the house, had taught her that lesson until it was carved into her bones. She crouched behind a granite boulder, her body seizing with tremors she could not control. She waited. The light grew. Below, tucked against a sheer rock face, was a cabin. It was not a hopeful sight. It was a fortress. It was built of thick, dark logs, with a low-pitched roof and small windows that looked like suspicious eyes. A plume of gray smoke rose straight up from the chimney. This was a place someone had built to be left alone. Her first instinct was to flee, to climb back up the ridge and vanish. But the hunger was absolute. It held the rifle to her head. She knew, with a flat certainty, that if she turned around, she would lie down in the snow within the hour and simply stop. Then she heard it, a low, contented clucking. Chickens! The sound was so normal, so alive, that it made her weep. Tears froze instantly on her raw cheeks. Chickens meant eggs. Eggs meant food. She did not debate the morality of it. Theft was a sin, but starvation was a faster death. She moved, not like a person, but like a starved fox. She stayed low, using the trees and the deep shadows as cover. The property was quiet. No dog barked, no man shouted. There was only the wind in the pines and the soft, promising sound of the hens. The coop was a small, sturdy box built near the tree line, away from the main cabin. She reached it, her breath held tight in her lungs. She fumbled with the wooden latch, her fingers numb and clumsy, like frozen sticks. The small door creaked. She winced, freezing, listening. Nothing, only the wind. Inside, it was dark and surprisingly warm, smelling of pine shavings and ammonia. 4 hens rustled in their nesting boxes, shifting on the straw. Cora's eyes adjusted, and she saw them. 3 pale brown eggs. It was a treasure. It was life. Her hands shook so violently she was terrified she would drop them. She slipped the first one into the pocket of her thin skirt. It was still warm from the hen. She reached for the second, her entire being focused on the smooth, perfect curve of the shell. A sound behind her, not the wind. The click of a rifle hammer being pulled back. It was the loudest sound she had ever heard. "Do not turn." The voice was deep, rough as bark, and dead calm. It was not a voice that wasted words or gave second chances. Cora froze. The egg was still in her hand. She could feel the man's presence behind her, the sheer size of him, like another mountain had just appeared at her back. "Drop the egg," the voice commanded. She opened her fingers. The egg fell, cracking softly on the packed earth floor. The small splash of yellow yolk felt like a murder. "Now, stand up, slow, and come out." She did as she was told. Her body moved with the jerky obedience of terror. She backed out of the small coop, her hands raised. When she was clear, she turned. He was a nightmare sculpted from the mountain itself. He was tall, broad, and dressed in buckskins and furs that made him seem part of the wilderness. His beard was a thick, grizzled tangle of black and gray, and his hair was long and matted. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. They were pale, the color of ice, and they held no light, no pity, no interest. They were the eyes of a man who had seen everything and felt nothing. He held a long rifle, and it was not pointed at the sky. It was level with her heart. This was Elias Shaw. He was known in the few scattered settlements down in the valley, though few had ever seen him. They called him the Mountain Man, a ghost, a former bounty hunter who had come up here to escape something, or to wait for death. He was a story told to scare children, and Cora was stealing his eggs. He looked at her. His gaze was not human. It was an appraisal. He was weighing her, the way a butcher weighs a piece of meat. Cora waited to die. She had expected it for so long. She felt almost peaceful. At least it would be quick. At least it was not Harlan Maddox, the man from Laramie. Elias Shaw's eyes moved from her face, down her thin frame. He saw the torn dress, a cheap calico that was useless against the elements. He saw her hands, raw and blue with cold. His eyes lingered on her feet, on the bloody, frozen rags. Then they moved back to her face. He saw the hollows beneath her cheekbones, the gray pallor of her skin, the sunken look of her eyes. He saw a corpse that was still, stubbornly, breathing. Cora tried to speak, to beg. "Please, I am so hungry." The words came out as a dry croak. He said nothing. He just watched her. The silence stretched. The cold, which she had forgotten in her terror, rushed back in. The world began to tilt, the hunger, the fear, the 6 days of walking, and the final, crushing despair. It all came down at once. The pine trees blurred. The terrifying man's face began to swim. I am sorry," she whispered. Then the world went black. She did not fall. She was simply extinguished. Elias watched the girl crumple. She fell like a pile of wet laundry, silent and boneless, onto the frosty ground. He did not move for a long moment. He kept the rifle steady. It could be a trick. He had seen tricks. Men in Laramie and Cheyenne would pay a woman to play weak, to get a man to lower his guard. But this was not a trick. The girl was skeletal. The snow around her was not melting. She was as cold as the ground she lay on. He lowered the rifle. He had options. He could leave her. The wolves would have her by nightfall. It was the mountain's way. He could put a bullet in her. It would be a mercy, and it would ensure she was not bait for something worse. He could turn her over to the sheriff in South Pass City, but that was a 2-day ride, and she would not live that long. He sighed. The sound was a low grunt of profound annoyance. A body was a complication. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, grabbed the collar of her thin dress, and began to drag her. She was light, frighteningly light. He dragged her across the clearing, his boots sinking into the stiff mud while her ruined feet bounced uselessly over the rocks. He hauled her up the 2 steps of his porch and through the heavy plank door of his cabin. He kicked the door shut, sealing out the world. Inside, the cabin was a single, large room, dark and warm. A great stone fireplace dominated one wall, a stew pot bubbling over a low flame. The air smelled of smoke, cured hides, coffee, and the savory scent of rabbit. He dragged her to the hearth and dropped her on the bearskin rug. She did not stir. He looked at her again, this time in the warmer light of the fire. She was young, maybe 19, maybe 20. It was hard to tell with the hunger on her. Her hair was a matted tangle of pale brown. full of twigs. He grunted again. He went to the corner, picked up a skinning knife, and returned. He knelt, grabbed her ankle, and sliced through the frozen, ruined rags she had wrapped around her feet. He peeled them away. Her feet were a mess of raw, blistered flesh and purple frostbite. She would lose the toes, he figured, if she lived. He pulled off the sodden, ruined slippers. Then he stood, took a heavy wool blanket from his cot, and threw it over her. He nuded her body with his boot, rolling her closer to the fire, but not so close that the heat would burn her unconscious skin. Then he went to his chair, sat down, and began to clean his rifle. He would wait. If she woke, she woke. If she died, he would deal with it in the morning. Cora woke to two sensations, pain and warmth. The warmth was a deep, penetrating heat that soaked into her back. It felt dangerously good. The pain was in her feet. They were throbbing, a deep, fiery ache that seemed to pulse in time with her heart. Her eyes snapped open. She was not in the snow. She was on a floor, by a fire. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the heat, her mind screaming. A room, a man, warmth. This was the pattern. This was the trap. She had woken up in strange rooms before, and it always meant the same thing. She checked her body with frantic hands. Her dress was still on, still buttoned. She looked up. He was there, the man from the coop. He was sitting in a rough-hewn wooden chair in the corner, watching her, just watching. His rifle was balanced on his knees. The cabin was dim, the only light coming from the fire and the two small, greasy paper windows. She pressed herself against the cold log wall, making herself as small as possible. What do you want?" Elias Shaw did not answer. He just looked at her, his icy eyes unreadable. He had been watching her breathe for an hour. I will not, I cannot." She stopped. Her throat was too dry. He watched her try to swallow. He looked at her, then at the rifle, then back at her. Finally, he stood. Cora flinched, pulling her knees to her chest. He was huge. He filled the cabin. He walked past her, his footsteps heavy on the plank floor. He went to the fireplace, picked up a long-handled ladle, and dipped it into the black iron pot. He poured a thick, dark liquid into a wooden bowl. He picked up a spoon and the bowl and walked toward her. Cora began to shake. This was it, the price. He stopped a few feet away and held out the bowl. She stared at it. It was stew, thick with meat and vegetables. The smell of it was so powerful it made her dizzy. She did not take it. I have no money," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I have nothing to trade." He pushed the bowl closer, his expression unchanged. It was not a request, it was a command. She looked from the stew to his face. He was waiting, warily, her hand shaking so badly she could barely control it. She reached out and took the bowl. It was hot. The heat burned her fingers, but she did not care. She did not eat. She held it, watching him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Eat," he said, the first word he had spoken to her inside. She dipped the spoon in. The first mouthful was scalding, but she swallowed it. It hit her empty stomach like a hot coal, and her body immediately, violently, demanded more. She ate. She did not taste it. She shoveled it in, her eyes never leaving his face. She ate like a wolf, hunched over the bowl, ready for him to snatch it away. He stood over her, motionless, until the bowl was empty. She scraped the bottom with a spoon, the sound loud in the silence. When she was finished, she held the empty bowl, waiting for the verdict. He took it from her hand. He went back to the pot, refilled it, and gave it back. She ate the second bowl slower, the edge of the animal panic dulling. The food was a miracle. It was spreading through her, a wave of life, chasing the cold from her blood. When she was done, she felt the exhaustion settle on her. heavy as a shroud. She was alive, which meant the payment was now due. Elias took the empty bowl and set it on the table. He returned to his chair and sat, placing the rifle back across his lap. The silence returned, thicker this time, heavy with food and expectation. Finally, he spoke. His voice was like rocks grinding together. "Where from?" It was not a question. It was a demand for facts. "East," she lied. "A settlement. My family died. The fever." He stared at her. He knew it was a lie. Her hands were too soft, though ruined. Her speech was not that of a homesteader's daughter. Her thin dress was wrong. "Laramie," he stated. Cora's blood ran cold. She said nothing. "Who hunts you?" "No one," she whispered. It was a pathetic, useless lie. "You are a bad liar," he said. It was simple fact. "You come from one of them houses, the ones near the railhead?" Cora's shame was so profound it felt like a physical blow. She looked down at her hands. He knew, of course he knew. A man like this, a hunter. He knew every kind of animal. And that was all she was. "He will find me," she whispered, the truth finally breaking free. "He will drag me back." "Maybe," Elias agreed. He did not seem to care one way or the other. He leaned forward slightly. The firelight carved deep shadows into his face. "You stole from me. That is the business we got. The Laramie man is your business." "I was hungry," she said, her voice small. "That does not change the fact." He ran a thumb along the wooden stock of his rifle. "The law down in South Pass says a thief gets hanged, or whipped. The law up here," he motioned to the cabin, "to the mountains, is me." Cora waited. "I see it two ways," he said, his voice dropping low. "You owe a debt for the eggs, and for the stew, and for the firewood you are burning." He paused, letting the weight of her obligation settle on her. "You want to be punished once, or punished forever?" Cora stared at him. The question hung in the smoky air. It was a riddle, and she knew both answers were a trap. What does once mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Once means I take what I am owed. I feed you one more time. I give you back them frozen rags you call shoes, and I point you down the mountain. You will be gone by noon. You might make it to the valley. You might not. The wolves are hungry. The cold is deep, but your debt will be paid. You will be free. Free to freeze, free to starve, free to be caught by Harlan's men, who were surely combing the territory for her. She knew what they would do to her when they caught her. Death by freezing suddenly seemed merciful. Her eyes drifted to the fire. It was so warm. The stew was heavy in her belly. And forever?" she whispered, dreading the answer. Elias Shaw looked at her, his face a mask of iron and beard. "Forever means you stay here." Cora's stomach clenched. She knew what that meant. She had been staying with a man for 4 years. It meant the floor, or his bed. It meant doing what he said. When he said it, it meant being used until he was tired of her. And then he would throw her out. It was the same as once, just slower. She looked around the small, solid cabin. It was one room, but it was tight against the wind. It was warm. It was stocked. Furs hung on the wall, and sacks of flour and beans were stacked in the corner. And he was one man, not a dozen, not strangers every night. He was a killer. She could see it in his eyes, but he was not the man from Laramie. He was quiet. He had given her stew before he asked for payment. Cora was tired. She was so very tired of running. She was tired of being cold. She was tired of being hungry. She was tired of being afraid. Forever was a long time, but once was a certain death. She met his icy gaze. She saw no mercy there, but she also saw no deceit. He was exactly what he appeared to be, a hard man making a hard bargain. "Forever?" she whispered, the word dissolving in the quiet. "Forever sounds warmer." She dropped her eyes, waiting. She expected him to laugh, or to stand up, or to grab her. She expected the punishment to begin. Elias Shaw just stared at her. He had expected her to choose once. He had expected her to run. He had not expected this. This was a complication. He stood up. Cora flinched again. He ignored her. He walked to a large wooden chest at the foot of his cot. He opened the lid. He pulled out a pair of thick wool trousers, patched at the knee, and a flannel shirt, also patched. He threw them on the floor in front of her. "Them clothes are wet," he said, nodding at her dress. "Get out of them. Put these on." He turned his back to her. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him, leaving her alone in the warmth. Cora stared at the closed door. He had turned his back. He had left. She scrambled to change. Her fingers were stiff and clumsy with the buttons of her dress. She pulled the cold, damp garment off, her skin erupting in goose flesh. She pulled on the man's clothes. They were huge, absurdly large. The shirt hung to her knees, and she had to roll the trousers up multiple times. But they were warm. They were thick. They were dry. She was tying the rope he used as a belt when the door opened again. He came back in, carrying an armload of firewood, which he dropped into the wood box by the hearth. He did not look at her. He gestured to the clothes. "Better. You will live." He then went to the corner by the door and picked up a wooden bucket. He held it out to her. "You chose forever," he said. "This ain't the kind of forever you think it is. You work, you stay. You do not work, you go. The creek is 50 yards past the coop. We need water." Cora looked at the bucket, then at him. He was not telling her to get in his bed. He was not telling her to pay him with her body. He was giving her a chore. You mean I work?" "That is what I said. You cook, you clean, you feed the chickens, you haul water, you mend, you stay alive. That is the bargain." He pushed the bucket into her hands. She took it. It was heavy. "Go on," he said. Cora walked to the door. Her stockinged feet, he had not given her boots, slipping in the massive trousers. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. She stopped. In her hunger and terror, she had not truly seen where she was. Now, fed and warm, she saw. The cabin was perched on a high ledge, backed by a sheer wall of granite. Below her, the valley fell away into a sea of dark green pines. Across the valley, a range of jagged, snow-covered peaks tore at the sky. They were so big they looked fake, like a painted backdrop. There were no other cabins, no smoke, no roads, no sign of human life anywhere. There was only the howl of the wind through the pines, and, far down in the valley, a faint, answering howl. Wolves. Elias Shaw was right. He did not need to lock the door. The mountain was the prison. There was nowhere else to go. She turned, filled the bucket from the creek, the water so cold it burned her hands, and hauled it, sloshing and heavy, back to the cabin. That night, she did not know where to sleep. He had one cot. She assumed the floor. After he had eaten his own dinner, in silence, he pointed to a pile of furs near the fire. "That is your spot." She curled up on the thick, soft pelts. It was the most comfortable bed she had had in 4 years. She was warm. She was fed. She was, for the moment, safe. She watched him. He was not drinking. He was not pacing. He sat in his chair, pulled a block of pine and a sharp knife from his pocket, and began to carve. He was making a spoon. She watched the steady, economic movements of his hands. The knife would flash, and a small, perfect curl of wood would fall away. He worked with an intense, quiet focus. The only sounds in the cabin were the crackle of the fire, the whisper of the wind outside, and the soft shave of his knife against the wood. He was a terrifying man. He was a silent man. He had a rifle and the eyes of a killer. But he had given her stew, he had given her warm clothes, and he had turned his back. Cora lay on the furs, her belly full, her feet aching, and watched the man who now owned her forever. His silence, which had terrified her, now felt like a thick, heavy blanket. It was unnerving. And, God help her, it was the first time she had felt calm in years. She closed her eyes and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, the sound of the carving knife a strange and steady lullaby. The mountain did not measure time in days. It measured time in melt, in the slow, agonizing retreat of the snow from the high meadows. For Cora, time was marked by the return of strength to her legs and the thickening of the skin on her hands. A week passed, then another, a routine, as silent and unyielding as the rock face behind the cabin, settled over them. Elias Shaw lived by the sun. He was gone before the first light touched the valley, a rifle slung over his shoulder, a ghost slipping between the lodgepole pines. He would return at dusk, sometimes with a brace of rabbits, once with a young buck slung across his massive shoulders. He would skin and dress the animal with a fluid, terrifying efficiency that made Cora turn away. He worked. He chopped wood, the steady thwack of his axe echoing through the cold air, a sound Cora came to associate with safety. It was the sound of a full wood box, the sound of a fire that would not go out. Cora worked, too. Her forever was a list of chores. She hauled water from the ice-edged creek. She fed the 4 fussy hens that had nearly cost her her life. She learned to bank the fire, to scrub the iron pot with sand, to grind the coffee beans he kept in a sack. She swept the floor, her hands raw from the rough-spun broom. It was hard, aching work, harder than any she had ever known, and she had never felt cleaner. In Laramie, her work had been a thing of soft beds and poisoned perfume, a thing done in the dark, a thing that left her feeling soiled from the inside out. This work, the hauling, the scrubbing, the cold water stinging her face, this was real. It was a trade, her labor for a place by the fire, her body, for the first time in 4 years, belonged only to her. Her feet, which she had been certain she would lose, were healing. The first few days, she had been unable to walk, and Elias had said nothing, simply hauling the water buckets himself. On the 3rd day, he had returned from the woods not with game, but with a handful of dark, stringy roots and a clump of gray-green moss. He had boiled them into a bitter-smelling paste and, without a word, had knelt, grabbed her ankle, and smeared the poultice over her frost-bitten toes. The sting had made her gasp, but the next morning the purple swelling had eased. They barely spoke. Their conversations were conducted in objects. One evening, he watched her hobble to the door, her feet still wrapped in clean rags. The men's trousers he had given her were hopelessly large, but the wool was warm. He left the cabin and returned from a small, dark root cellar dug into the hillside, a place she had not yet been. He tossed a pair of boots onto the floor by her pallet. They were old, the leather cracked and stiff, but the soles were thick. They were men's boots, but small, as if they had belonged to a boy. She put them on. They were too large, and her feet swam in them. She stuffed the toes with spare rags, which was clumsy. She did not complain. It was a gift. The next night, while she was cleaning the supper dishes, he motioned for the boots. He took them, and for an hour, he worked with an awl, a piece of new leather, and a needle and sinew. He did not resize them, but he punched new holes and refashioned the lacing, allowing her to bind them tight to her ankles. He added a softer deerskin lining to the inside. He handed them back. "Try." She slipped her feet in. They were snug. They were warm. She looked up at him, her throat thick. "Thank you." He only nodded, his face unreadable in the firelight, and went back to checking his traps. Cora found her own way to speak. A week later, she saw him return, his thick buckskin shirt snagged on a branch, a long, V-shaped tear in the shoulder. That night, after he had gone to his cot and turned his back to the room, she took the shirt from the peg. Her hands were clumsy, but she had mended her own clothes in Laramie to save what little coin she earned. She found his mending kit. More sinew, thick needles. She sat by the low fire, her stitches small and tight, reinforcing the tear with a small piece of scrap canvas. She folded it and left it on the table. In the morning, he put it on. He paused, his fingers tracing the line of her stitches. He looked at her, held her gaze for a solid second, and then, as always, he picked up his rifle and left. The silence was changing. It was no longer the silence of a predator and its prey. It was the silence of two people in a very small boat, surrounded by a very large, dark ocean. They did not need to speak of the waves. They were both too busy rowing. Then, in the third week, the mountain remembered it was still spring. The day had been unnaturally warm, the sky a low, heavy gray. By dusk, the wind began to hoot and moan through the pines, a sound like a grieving woman. As darkness fell, the storm broke. It was not a gentle rain. It was a raw, high-country thunderstorm. The wind hit the cabin like a fist, and the rain turned to ice, hammering the roof. Cora had the fire built high, but the storm seemed to suck the warmth from the room. Elias sat at the table, oiling his rifle, his presence a solid, unmoving bulk against the chaos outside. A flash of lightning lit the cabin, bleaching the room white for a split second, followed almost immediately by a crack of thunder so loud it seemed to split the mountain in two. The log walls vibrated. Cora screamed. It was not a yell. It was a thin, torn sound, ripped from her throat. She dropped the bowl she was drying and scrambled backward, crashing into the wall by the cold, unused hearth. She slid down the logs, pulling her knees to her chest, her hands over her ears. Elias was on his feet, rifle in hand, in a single, fluid motion. He scanned the dark windows, then looked at her. She was shaking, not from the cold. It was a violent, bone-deep tremor. Another flash of lightning, another cannon shot of thunder. Cora whimpered, rocking back and forth. "No, no, no, please, Harlan, no!" Elias lowered the rifle. He watched her. She was not in the cabin. She was somewhere else. She was in Laramie. "I did not tell. I did not tell," she whispered, her voice frantic and thin. It was just a knife. For protection. Please do not take it." Elias stood motionless in the center of the room. The storm raged, but inside, there was only the sound of the fire and Cora's desperate, broken whispers. "He found it, under the pillow. He laughed. He said he would show me what a knife was for. He held it. Oh, God, I am sorry. I will be good. Please." She was weeping now, dry, gasping sobs that hurt to hear. She had hidden her face in her knees, her whole body clenched against a memory that was as real as the storm. Elias did not move. He did not go to her. He did not offer comfort. He did not say, "You are safe." He just stood, his face carved from shadow, and he listened. He listened to her unravel, piece by terrified piece. In the corner of his cabin, he heard the name Harlan. He heard about the knife. He learned, in those few fractured sentences, everything he needed to know about the men who were hunting her. The storm raged for an hour. Cora's weeping subsided into choked breaths and, finally, an exhausted silence. She did not move from the corner. She fell asleep there, huddled like a pile of rags, her body finally giving in to the terror. Elias stood in the dark for a long time. The fire burned low. The thunder moved off, rumbling its discontent in the next valley. He looked at the woman asleep on the floor. He looked at the pallet of furs by the fire. He walked to his cot. He reached under his own pillow and pulled out a worn leather sheath. He drew the knife. It was not a small skinning blade. It was a hunting knife, heavy, with a 9-inch blade polished from use, and a handle carved from antler. It was a weapon. It was his weapon. He crossed the room. Cora did not stir. He knelt beside her. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, with a hand that was surprisingly gentle, he lifted the edge of her makeshift pillow, a sack stuffed with soft moss. He slid the knife, sheath and all, underneath it, placing it exactly where her hand would fall if she reached for comfort. He said nothing. He went to his chair, sat down, and watched the dying fire for the rest of the night, the rifle resting across his knees. Cora woke with a stiff neck and a feeling of profound, aching shame. The morning light was pale, the air washed clean by the storm. She had collapsed. She had shown him the raw, terrified thing she kept hidden. She expected him to be disgusted, or worse, to be intrigued. She expected him to look at her with that cold, assessing gaze, knowing just how broken she was. He was at the fire, coffee pot in hand, his back to her. He acted as if nothing had happened. She started to push herself up, and her hand brushed against the pillow. She felt it, cold, hard leather. Her breath hitched. She thought it was a snake. She snatched her hand back, then, confused, she reached again. Her fingers closed around the antler hilt. She pulled it out. It was the knife, his knife. She knew it. She had seen it on his belt. It was heavy in her hand, the balance perfect, the blade gleaming. It was not a toy. It was not a kitchen paring knife. It was a tool for killing. She looked at the weapon, then at his broad, unmoving back. A captor would have seen her terror and taken away anything sharp. A savior would have knelt, taken her in his arms, and promised, "I will not let anyone hurt you." Elias Shaw had done neither. He had heard her story. He had understood her fear. And he had given her the one thing he believed in, a better weapon. He was not her keeper. He was not her rescuer. He was something else, something unknown. He was a man who spoke in actions, and this action was louder than any word of comfort. It said, "I heard you. Your fear is real. Fight back." She slid the knife back into its sheath and tucked it deep under the furs. She stood up, her muscles aching, and grabbed the water buckets. "I will fetch the water," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "I boiled some," he grunted, not turning. "For your face. The coffee is hot." She stopped. She went to the hearth, poured the hot water into the basin, and washed her face. It was the first time he had ever anticipated her needs. The next few weeks passed. The thaw came in earnest. The creek swelled to a brown, angry roar. The snow reek-headed, leaving behind a world of wet earth and the sharp, clean smell of pine. Cora grew stronger. The hollows in her cheeks filled out. The work and the steady food was changing her. She was still thin, but it was a wiry, tough thinness, not the brittle fragility of starvation. She had the knife. She slept with it every night. She did not need it. Not here. But it was a promise. She began to see him, really see him. He was not just a large, silent man. He was a man of deep, unbreakable habits. He was, she realized, profoundly lonely. But he had chosen this loneliness. He had built it around himself like a fortress, and she was now inside the walls. One morning, she woke early, before the sun. The cabin was cold. She wanted to restart the fire before he rose. She grabbed the buckets and went to the creek, moving silently in her mended boots. The sun was just breaking, casting the valley in a pale, pink light. She reached the bend in the creek, the spot where the water pooled deep before rushing over the rocks. And she stopped. He was there. He was standing in the middle of the stream, the icy water swirling around his waist. He was bathing. His back was to her. She had seen him clothed, a formidable shape of buckskin and wool. She had seen him in her mind as a force, a hunter. But now, she saw the man. His back was a map of a life she could barely imagine. It was covered in scars. She had seen scars on men in Laramie, knife wounds from fights over cards, whip marks on men who had run from work crews. But these were different. There were the puckered, circular scars of at least 3 bullets, one high on his left shoulder, another dangerously close to his spine. But it was the burns that made her hold her breath. A huge, slick patch of melted skin covered his right shoulder blade, an old, terrible wound that had healed in a swirl of shiny, ruined flesh. It looked as if someone had poured molten metal on him. He was a man who had been shot, and a man who had been burned. He must have felt her gaze. He did not turn quickly. He simply, slowly, looked over his shoulder. He saw her. He saw her staring at his ruined back. His eyes, usually so flat and cold, held a flicker of something, shame, or just a deep, animal weariness. He did not move to cover himself. He did not yell at her. He just held her gaze. Cora did not blush. She did not run. She felt a sudden, sharp ache in her chest, a kinship she could not explain. She, too, was covered in scars. Hers were just on the inside. She looked at him, at his wounds, and she gave a single, slow nod, an acknowledgement. Then she turned, dipped her buckets in the stream, and walked back up the hill. He did not come back to the cabin until she had been gone for a good 10 minutes. That night, the silence was different. It was no longer a space they shared, but a thing that was stretched taut between them, vibrating with unspoken questions. He sat in his chair, carving a new trap trigger. She sat on her furs, mending one of his socks, the knife a comforting weight beside her. The fire popped. The wind sighed outside. Cora put the sock down. "Who were you?" Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the cabin. Elias stopped carving. He did not look up. "What?" "Before this," she said, her voice stronger. "Before the mountain, who were you?" He was silent for a long time. She thought he would not answer. She thought he would stand up and go to his cot, pulling the curtain of his silence around him. He laid the knife and the piece of wood on the table. He leaned forward, resting his powerful forearms on his knees, and stared into the fire. "I was a husband," he said. His voice was a low rumble, rusty from disuse, and a father. Cora waited. She did not breathe. "My wife was named Anna, my boy. He was Samuel. He was 6. He spoke to the flames, not to her. "We had a place down in Colorado Territory, near the San Juans. Just a homestead. We were building it. It was good." He paused, his jaw working under his beard. "There was a disagreement with some men from a mining camp. They were raiders, men who had seen too much blood in the war and decided they liked it. They came back." His hands clenched into fists on his knees. "I was hunting. I was gone 2 days. I came back, and I smelled the smoke from 5 miles off." He fell silent. The fire crackled, eating the log. "They burned the settlement," he whispered. "The church, the store, my cabin. Anna and Samuel, they were with the others. In the church, they burned it." Cora felt the tears well in her eyes, hot and sharp. "The scars," she said, her voice thick. "On your back." "That was before," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "That was Laramie, when I was a bounty hunter. A man I brought in. His brothers caught me. That was just work." He looked back at the fire. This was different." "What did you do?" she asked, already knowing. "I was a bounty hunter," he said again, as if that explained it all. "I knew how to track. There were 6 of them. I took my rifle. I took my knife. I did not come up to this mountain for a year." "You found them?" "I found all of them," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "The last one was in a saloon in Cheyenne. I did not I did not wait for him to draw. He looked at his hands. I killed them all. For Anna, for Samuel, and when the last one was dead, they were still gone. It did not fix it. It just added more blood. He finally looked at her. His eyes were not cold. They were hollowed out. So I came here. I came up here where there is nothing left to burn, where there is no one left to lose. He had given her his forever. It was not a punishment. It was a penance. He was serving a life sentence, and his prison was this mountain. Cora felt her heart break, not for herself, but for him. She uncurled herself from her pallet of furs. She moved across the small space between them. He watched her, wary, like a wolf that did not understand a kind gesture. She did not sit on his lap. She did not touch his face. She sat on the stone hearth at his feet, beside his worn boot. The heat from the fire warmed her back. She looked at his large, scarred hand, the one that rested, open, on his knee, the hand that had killed 6 men, the hand that had given her a knife. Slowly, she reached out and put her own small, work-roughened hand on top of his. Elias Shaw went rigid. His entire body tensed, as if she had struck him. He stared at her hand on his, this small, pale thing covering his scars. She did not say, I am sorry. She did not say, I understand. She just stayed. She let her hand rest on his. He did not pull away. He sat, frozen, for a long minute, then, very slowly. She felt the tension bleed out of him. His hand remained still under hers. They sat like that for a long time. The man, the woman, and the 2 ghosts that filled the cabin. The silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It was full. And outside, the last of the snow dripped from the eaves, and the mountain began, finally, to turn green. The hand she had placed on his was a bridge. In the days that followed, they began, cautiously, to cross it. The high country spring melted into a brief, intense summer. The mountain air, once sharp with ice, became thick with the scent of pine resin and damp earth. The roar of the creek softened to a murmur. Life, which had been a frozen, desperate thing, was now a green and buzzing certainty. Their silence, once a chasm of fear and mistrust, became a shared language. It was no longer empty. It was full of all the things they had told each other without speaking. Elias began to teach her the mountain. He was still a man of few words, but his gestures were a complete vocabulary. He took her into the woods, not to the game trails he used, but to the aspen groves where the rabbits ran. He showed her how to read the faint tracks, how to see the paths the animals used. His large, scarred hands, which she had seen kill and skin a deer, were now patient and slow. He showed her how to find the right sapling, how to bend it, how to tie the knot for a snare using a piece of sinew. You pull it this way, he grunted, his fingers guiding hers. You set the loop, not too big, not too small. You hide it. You cover your scent with pine needles. Cora learned. She was a quiet, focused student. Her life had depended on reading the moods of dangerous men. She found reading the habits of a rabbit was not so different. It was about patience. It was about seeing what was not obvious. A few days later, she went to check the snares alone. One was sprung. A large snowshoe hare was caught, still and perfect. She did not feel triumph. She felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. She brought it back, holding it by the legs, and laid it on the skinning block. Elias came from the woodpile. He looked at the rabbit, then at her. He gave a single, curt nod. It was more praise than she had ever received in her life. She learned to do the skinning herself, her motions becoming as clean and efficient as his. He was teaching her how to survive, not just in his cabin, but in his world. He was giving her his strength, piece by piece. In the evenings, she began to give him something in return. In the large wooden chest where he kept his spare clothes, she had found a small stack of books. Their covers were warped by damp. The pages yellowed. One was a thick, leather-bound Bible. Another was a collection of plays by a man named Shakespeare. The third was a slim volume of poetry. They had belonged to Anna. That night, after the dishes were clean and the fire was built high, she pulled out the poetry book. He was carving, his knife making its soft, rhythmic sounds. "Can I?" she asked, holding it up. He glanced at the book. His face tightened for a moment, a shadow passing over his eyes. Then he nodded. "The light is poor." "I can see well enough." Her voice was hesitant at first, rusty from disuse. She had learned to read at a church school, long ago, before Laramie, before her life had been ruined. She read a poem about a field of flowers, then one about the sea. Her voice grew stronger, filling the small, warm cabin. Elias did not look up. He kept carving, but his hands slowed. The shave of his knife became softer, farther apart. He was listening. She was bringing a voice back into his silent house. She was reading his dead wife's books. She was not replacing Anna. Cora knew that. She was simply here. A new living thing in a place that had been a tomb. She read every night. She read about kings and battles from the playbook. She read the Psalms from the Bible. And Elias listened, his face a mask in the firelight. But his silence was no longer that of a stone. It was the silence of a man drinking water after a long thirst. The wall between them, the one built of his grief and her fear, was crumbling. One night, she finished a passage. He had put down his carving and was staring into the fire, his mind clearly 100 miles and 10 years away. He looked lost. He looked unbearably sad. Cora felt an ache in her chest, a sudden, powerful urge that was not gratitude, not pity, but something far more complicated. She put the book down. She rose from her pallet and crossed to his chair. He looked up, his eyes clouded, pulled from his memories. She did not plan it. She did not think. She simply leaned down and pressed her lips to his. It was not a kiss of passion. It was shy, clumsy, and quick. It was the only way she knew how to say, "I am here. You are not alone." Elias reacted as if she had burned him. He pulled back, a harsh, sharp movement, his chair scraping loudly on the wooden floor. He stood up abruptly, putting the chair between them. Cora froze, her hand flying to her mouth. Rejection. It was the old, familiar sting. She had overstepped. She had mistaken his quiet for kindness, his tolerance for affection. She was the hired help. She was the stray dog he had taken in. I am sorry," she stammered, backing away, her face hot with shame. "I did not mean—" "Go to bed," he said. His voice was not angry. It was rough, strangled. "Elias. Now, Cora." She fled to her pallet, her back to him, and pulled the furs up over her head. She did not cry. She just lay there, rigid, her heart a cold stone in her chest. Elias stood by the table for a long time. He looked at his hands. They were trembling. He was trembling. He was not afraid of her. He was afraid of himself. When he looked at her, he did not see the woman she had been in Laramie. He saw this new creature, this quiet, strong woman who had healed before his eyes, who had brought a voice back to his cabin, who had put her hand on his and not flinched. She was fragile. She was like a new-hatched bird, and he was a hawk. He was a man who had killed. He was a man whose hands were stained. He had lost one family to violence, and his own violence had been the answer. He was afraid of breaking her. He was afraid that his touch, his want, would be a poison. He was afraid of being the very thing she had run from. He pulled away not because he did not want her, but because he did, and he did not believe he deserved to. A few days passed. The tension was back in the cabin. The kiss was a rock in the middle of the room that they both had to walk around. He barely spoke to her. She kept her eyes down, did her chores, And she did not read. The silence was loud again. One evening, the air had turned cool, a reminder that the summer was short at this altitude. Cora finished scrubbing the pot and stepped out onto the porch. The sky was a deep, impossible velvet, punched with a million stars. The air was so clear they seemed close enough to touch. She shivered, rubbing her arms. The door opened behind her. She did not turn. Elias stepped out. He held his heavy wool coat, the one lined with beaver fur. He did not hand it to her. He stepped behind her and draped it over her shoulders. It was huge. It enveloped her, falling to her shins. It smelled of him, wood smoke, pine, leather, and the clean, sharp scent of the mountain. It was impossibly warm. She slid her arms into the sleeves and wrapped it tight, clutching the front. "Thank you." He did not reply. He stood behind her. She could feel the heat of his body, a furnace at her back. She kept her gaze on the stars, afraid to move. Then his hands, large and rough, settled on her waist. Cora's breath caught. He did not pull her back against him. He did not grip her. He just rested his hands there. It was a gesture of possession, of protection, of simple presence. It was not a lover's touch, and it was not a master's. It was his. He had not been rejecting her. He had been afraid. He stood behind her, his hands on her waist, his body a shield against the night. And they stood there, in silence, for a long time, watching the stars. He was holding her. He was staying. That night the wolves came. It was not the distant, lonely howl she had grown used to. This was a pack, close, their calls and yips echoing off the rock face behind the cabin. They had a kill, somewhere near the stream. The sound was wild, hungry, and terrifying. Cora lay on her pallet, the knife clutched in her hand under the pillow, but the knife felt small. The log walls felt thin. The sound was the sound of her own fear, of being hunted, of being torn apart. She could not stand it. She sat up, her heart hammering. Across the room, Elias was on his cot, a still shape in the darkness. "They are not coming in," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They are busy. Go to sleep." But she was shaking. It was the storm all over again, the same bone-deep terror. She stood up, clutching her blanket. She walked across the cold floor. He sat up as she approached. "What is it?" I am afraid," she whispered. She stood by his cot, a small, trembling ghost in his oversized shirt. He looked at her, his face impossible to read in the gloom. He did not tell her to go back to her bed. He did not invite her in. He simply shifted his large body over to one side of the cot, making room. It was all the invitation she needed. She slid under the heavy wool blankets. The cot was narrow, and she was pressed against the log wall on one side and the solid wall of his body on the other. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. She curled on her side, her back to him. She was in his bed, the great, terrible, silent man, and she had never, ever felt so safe. His body was a furnace. She could feel the heat of him soaking into her, chasing away the cold, chasing away the sound of the wolves. She could feel the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. He smelled like the coat, like the mountain. She did not sleep, not at first. She just lay there, absorbing the simple, profound comfort of not being alone in the dark. She began sleeping there every night. It was a wordless agreement. The wolves left, but the habit remained. It was not born of desire, but of safety. She would finish her reading, bank the fire, and slip into the cot beside him. He would make room. They would lie back to axe, two separate people sharing a small, warm space. But safety began to change. The nights were cold. Instinctively, she would shift in her sleep, seeking his warmth. She would wake up with her back pressed against his, or his arm thrown heavily over her waist. She became achingly aware of him, the feel of his skin, the rough texture of his beard when he turned, the sound of his breathing, deep and slow. This was not Laramie. No man had ever just slept beside her. No man had ever offered warmth without demanding a payment. The touches, at first accidental, became less so, a hand that lingered, his fingers brushing her arm as he moved. One morning, she woke to find herself curled against his chest, her head tucked under his chin, his arms wrapped around her. She had not woken. He had not moved away. The air in the cabin became thick, charged, the forever that he had spoken of, the one that meant chores and survival, was shifting. It was becoming something else, something terrifying and new. One night, a full moon bathed the cabin in pale, silver light. She had been reading, but her voice faltered. He was watching her, not carving, not cleaning his rifle, just watching. His pale eyes seemed to shine in the gloom. She put the book down. The silence was no longer comfortable. It was electric. "Cora," he said. His voice was rough. She looked at him. He stood up from his chair. He walked to the cot and sat on the edge, looking at her where she sat on her pallet. "This," he said, gesturing between them, "this is not what I intended." "I know," she whispered. "I am not a good man," he said, his voice low. I have told you the things I have done." "You gave me a knife," she said. "You gave me your coat. You listened to me read." He looked at his hands. "I am old, and I am broken, and you are." "I am broken, too," she said. She stood up. She walked to him, knelt on the floor in front of him. So they were eye to eye. "We are two broken pieces, Elias, but we fit." He reached out, his hand shaking, and touched her face. His thumb, calloused and rough, traced the line of her cheekbone. She did not flinch. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch. He groaned, a low sound of surrender, of a pain he had held for a sea. "You are like a spring flower," he whispered, "pushing up through the snow. I am afraid. I am afraid I will crush you." "You will not," she said. "You are the least. You are the only man who has never tried." He looked at her, his eyes full of a storm of grief and loneliness and a deep, burning need. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not the shy kiss she had given him. This was a kiss of a starving man. It was rough and desperate and full of a decade of solitude. But it was not violent. It was a plea. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. He pulled her up, onto his lap. He held her face between his hands, kissing her again and again, as if he could not believe she was real. Then his hands went to the laces of the shirt she wore. His shirt. His fingers fumbled. She stopped him. She took his large, scarred, trembling hands in her own. She held them to her chest. "I need this," she whispered, her voice fierce, her eyes locked on his. Do not stop, please. I need this. I need you." It was her choice, her words. It broke him. The last wall of his control crumbled. With a reverence that stunned her, he began to undress her. His hands, which she had seen break a deer's neck, were now so gentle they barely grazed her skin. He unlaced the shirt. He slid it off her shoulders. He looked at her thin shoulders and the pale skin of her collarbone. He looked at her not with hunger, but with a kind of awe. She had been undressed by dozens of men. They had been quick, rough, impatient. They had looked at her like a piece of meat. Elias looked at her like she was a secret, like he was seeing something holy. He lifted her and laid her on the cot, on the soft furs. He undressed himself in the moonlight, and she saw him. Not just his scarred back, but all of him. The bullet wounds, the burned skin, the hard, powerful body of a man who lived a hard life. He was not ashamed. They were just him. When he lay down beside her, He trembled. The great, solid, unmovable mountain man was shaking. When he finally touched her, his skin to hers, it was a shock, a jolt of pure, clean heat. She did not feel fear. She felt found. It was quiet. It was slow. It was reverent. He kissed her shoulders, her throat, her hands. He memorized her with his fingertips. And when he finally joined their bodies, Cora gasped. It was not pain. It was recognition. It was the feeling of a lock clicking open. In the aftermath, he held her, his arms wrapped tightly around her, his face buried in her hair. He was still shaking, and Cora began to cry. He tensed instantly, pulling back to look at her. Cora, did I hurt you?" His voice was raw with panic, his old fear that he had broken her. She shook her head, the tears rolling into her hair. "No," she choked out. "Oh, no." "Then why—" She clutched his arm, her whole body shuddering with sobs she had held back for years. Because you saw me," she wept. You looked at me. No one has ever looked at me." He did not understand, not fully, but he understood her pain. He held her. He rocked her gently, his hand stroking her hair. He held her as she cried for her lost years, for the shame, for the pain, and for this new, terrifying, beautiful thing she had found in his arms. He held her until she cried herself to sleep. The next morning, the world was new. The sun streamed into the cabin, bright and clean. Cora woke first, wrapped in his arms. She felt light. She was not just a survivor. She was not just a worker. She was his. She slipped out of bed, put on his shirt, and built the fire. When he woke, he watched her. The silence was back, but it was a new silence. It was the silence of a husband and a wife. He dressed. He came up behind her at the fire, put his arms around her waist, and just held her, his chin resting on the top of her head. She leaned back against him. They fit. "I will check the traps," he said at last. "I will make coffee," she replied. It was normal. It was perfect. An hour later, he came back. He did not come in. He stood in the doorway, and the man from the morning was gone. The bounty hunter was back. His face was iron. "What is it?" she asked, the coffee pot halfway to the fire. "Riders," he said. His voice was flat. "3 of them, down in the valley, moving this way." Cora's blood turned to ice. "Hide," he commanded. "In the root cellar, now." How do you know?" "I know," he said. He took his rifle from the wall. He checked the load. "One of them. I recognize the horse. It is a Palomino mare from the stable in Laramie." Laramie, the word was a death knell. Her past, it had found her. Harlan Maddox. Cora began to shake. "We have to go," she said, her voice frantic. "Out the back. We can climb the rock face. We can hide." "No." He laid out a box of cartridges on the table. "Elias, you do not understand. They will kill you. I have to run. I can lead them away." He grabbed her. He gripped her upper arms, hard, forcing her to look at him. His pale eyes were not cold. They were on fire. "You run. You will keep running," he said, his voice a low, deadly snarl. "You will run until your feet bleed and they catch you in the snow, and I will not be there." I cannot ask you to." "You did not ask," he said. "You chose forever, and forever is here, in this cabin, with me." He let go of one of her arms and picked up the rifle. "I told you who I was. Cora, I told you what I did. I have killed for my family before." He looked into her eyes, and she saw the man who had hunted 6 men and put them in the ground. "You stay," he said. "I will kill for you again." His words hung in the air, heavy and sharp as an axe head. "I kill for you again." Cora looked at him. The man who had shown her how to set a snare, who had listened to her read poetry, was gone. In his place was the man who had tracked 6 murderers across a territory and put them in the ground. His pale eyes were flat, his body set in a stance of absolute, lethal stillness. He was a fortress, and he was about to bring the war to his own door. She felt a surge of terror, but it was not for herself. It was for him. She saw his future. More blood, more ghosts. He had come to this mountain to bury his past, and she had just dug it up. If he killed for her, he would be lost. The part of him that was Elias Shaw, the husband, the man who carved spoons, would be consumed by the bounty hunter who had burned his own soul for revenge. She could not be the reason. She would not be his ruin. "Elias," she whispered, "you cannot." "Get in the cellar," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. He turned from her, already moving to the small window, checking the sight lines down the valley. "Please," she begged. Let us go. We can go higher up. We can hide. They will not find us." "They are trackers," he said, not looking at her. "They know this valley. They are coming for you. They will not stop. Now, move." He was already pulling the heavy table away from the wall, preparing to use it as a barricade. She watched him, her heart a cold, hard knot. He was ready to die for her. He was ready to kill for her. And she loved him too much to let him. She nodded, a jerky, submissive gesture. "Yes, the cellar." He gave her a quick, appraising look, then turned back to his work. "Take the rifle, the small one, and the ammunition. Bar the door from the inside." "I will," she lied. He went to the door, opened it a crack, and slipped outside. Silent as smoke. He was going to check the perimeter, find his first point of defense. The moment the door clicked shut, Cora moved. There was no time for a plan. There was only the raw, screaming instinct to flee, not from Harlan, but for Elias. She had to draw them away. If they were chasing her, they would not be fighting him. Her hands shook. She grabbed a piece of rough parchment he used for tallying his furs. With a piece of charcoal from the hearth, she scribbled. Her hand was stiff, the letters clumsy. "I am sorry. I cannot let you. Do not follow." It was a pathetic, useless note, but it was all she had. She grabbed the knife he had given her, jamming it into the rope belt of her trousers. She looked at the small rifle, but shook her head. It was too heavy, too slow. She needed to be fast. She grabbed a handful of dried venison, stuffed it in her pocket, and ran to the back of the cabin. She did not take the game trail. He would expect that. She went straight to the sheer rock face that protected the cabin's rear. It was not a sheer cliff, but a steep, treacherous slope of granite and scrub pine. She had seen him climb it to get a better view. She had seen the mountain goats use it. She put her hands and feet to the stone and began to climb. Her lungs burned. Her mended boots slipped on the loose gravel. Her hands, soft from weeks of healing, were torn open on the sharp rock. She did not care. She scrambled, pulling herself up, driven by the image of Elias falling in front of his own cabin, a bullet in his chest. She climbed until her arms were jelly, until she was high above the cabin, hidden in a cleft of rock. She looked down. She could see the riders. 3 of them, just as he had said, walking their horses up the valley trail. They were close. She also saw Elias. He burst from the cabin, rifle in hand. He looked at the trail, then back at the cabin. He knew she was gone. He roared her name. "Cora!" The sound was ripped from him, a raw sound of pure fury. It echoed off the cliffs. The riders heard it. They stopped. They looked up. Cora scrambled higher. "He sees me. They see him. Run! Just run!" She pulled herself over the rim of the ledge and disappeared from his view. Elias saw her vanish. He saw the riders spur their horses, fanning out, heading for his cabin. He was caught, between her and them. He swore, a low, vicious sound. He raised his rifle. He did not aim at the riders. He aimed at the rock, just above their heads. He fired. The shot cracked across the valley. The bullet sparked, sending rock chips flying. The riders scattered, diving for cover. "You want her! You come through me!" he bellowed. But his heart was not in it. His eyes were on the ridge. She was gone, and the sky, which had been a clear, cold gray, was turning a strange, sickly yellow. The wind was picking up, and it was carrying the first stinging flecks of snow. He fired again at the men, forcing them to stay down. Then, under the cover of his own shot, he turned and ran, not to the cabin, but to the rock face. He began to climb. He did not care about the riders. They were just men. He could kill men. He was chasing the mountain. He was chasing the storm. And he was chasing a fool of a woman who thought she could save him by killing herself. Cora ran. She was on the high plateau, a wide, wind-blasted expanse of rock and stunted pines. There was no trail. The snow was coming down fast now, not in gentle flakes, but in a hard, horizontal spray. The wind howled, a physical blow that staggered her. She had no idea where she was going. She was just moving away from the cabin, away from Elias. She hoped the riders would follow her, that their tracks would lead them away from him. But the snow was covering her tracks as fast as she made them. The temperature plummeted. The world vanished, reduced to a screaming wall of white, 10 feet in every direction. The venison was frozen solid in her pocket. Her ears and cheeks were numb, then began to ache with a deep, burning pain. The cold was a living thing, a wolf with teeth of ice, and it was tearing her apart. She stumbled, her foot catching on a root hidden by the snow. She fell hard, her knee cracking against a stone. A sharp, hot pain shot up her leg. She cried out, but the wind stole the sound. She tried to stand. Her leg would not hold her. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She was going to die. Here, alone. She began to crawl. She saw a shape in the blizzard. A dark mass. It was a huge, fallen pine, its roots ripped from the earth, forming a shallow cave. She crawled into the lee of the tree, huddling against the frozen trunk, pulling her knees to her chest. She was so cold. She was so tired. She thought of Elias. She thought of the warm cabin, the smell of coffee, the feel of his hand on her waist. She had run from the safest place she had ever known. She pulled the knife from her belt. She held it. It was the last piece of him she had. She closed her eyes. It was easier to sleep. Just sleep. Elias moved like the storm itself. He was not a man. He was an elemental, a creature of pure, cold rage. He was a tracker, and this was his mountain. The riders were lost. They were down in the valley, huddled under a rock, cursing the weather, or perhaps already retreating. They did not matter. He found her trail. It was almost gone, but he saw it. A scuff on a rock that was not yet covered, a broken twig. He moved with a speed that defied the wind, his eyes reading the ground, his body braced against the blizzard. He knew this plateau. He knew the fallen pine. He had seen it as a landmark for years. He knew the storm would drive any living thing to its shelter. He found her. She was a small, white mound, already half buried in a drift. She was not moving. "No," he growled. The word was an oath. He plunged through the snow and grabbed her. She was limp. Her skin was a waxy, pale blue. Her eyelids fluttered, but she did not see him. Her hand was frozen around the hilt of his knife. "God damn you, Cora!" he whispered, his voice cracking. "God damn you for this!" He did not hesitate. He ripped his own heavy coat from his back, the one lined with fur. He wrapped it around her, pulling her stiff limbs into it, cocooning her. He lifted her. She weighed nothing. He put her over his shoulder and stood up, turning his back to the wind, and he began to walk. The journey back was a descent into hell. The wind screamed, trying to rip her from his grasp. The snow was blinding, the ground treacherous. He was covered only in his wool shirt and buckskins, and the cold was already deep in his bones. His body began to shake, a violent, uncontrollable tremor from the cold and the massive exertion. He swore at the wind, he swore at the snow, he swore at Harlan Maddox, and he swore at God. "You do not take this one," he snarled at the sky, his words whipped away by the gale. "You hear me? You do not get this one." He half fell, half slid down the rock face, shielding her with his own body, his hands and back scraping against the stone. He landed in the snowdrift behind the cabin, his legs buckling. He kicked the cabin door open. It slammed against the wall. The fire was almost dead, the cabin a cold, gray box. He did not drop her. He stumbled to the cot and laid her down. She was a frozen doll. He worked with a frantic, brutal efficiency. He took the knife from her frozen hand, tossing it on the table. He cut her frozen clothes from her body, the wet trousers, the shirt, slicing them away and throwing the icy rags to the floor. She was pale, her skin so cold it burned his fingers. He piled every blanket, every fur, every spare piece of cloth in the cabin on top of her. He went to the hearth and worked, his hands shaking so badly he could barely strike the flint. He coaxed the embers, added kindling, and built the fire into a roaring, desperate inferno. He stripped his own wet shirt off, ignoring the cold that clung to his skin. He stood before the fire, his scarred back to the flames, his body shaking, and he watched her. He waited. He did not know if he had been in time. Cora woke to heat, a suffocating, intense heat. She was in a cave of furs. She was alive. Her body ached, every joint, every muscle, her skin itself. It all screamed in a dull, throbbing agony. She opened her eyes. The cabin was lit by a fire that looked like the mouth of hell, and standing in front of it was Elias. He was naked from the waist up, his back to the flames. He was not the calm, solid man she knew. He was a creature of shadow and firelight, his scars livid, his chest heaving. He was shaking, his whole body seized with tremors from the cold he had endured, and he was watching her. "Elias," her voice was a dry croak. He walked to the cot. He loomed over her. His face was a mask of such exhaustion and cold fury that she flinched. "You are an idiot," he said. His voice was flat, dead. I, she stammered, tears filling her eyes. "I did not want you to get hurt." "So you chose freezing," he stated. He was not yelling. It was worse. He was dissecting her. "You chose them. You chose dying alone on a rock. Was that better?" "I was trying to save you," she cried. "You do not save me," he snarled, leaning closer. "I save you. That was the bargain. You ran, you broke the bargain." "I am sorry," she wept, turning her face into the furs. He gripped her chin, his fingers cold, and forced her to look at him. "Do not leave again." It was not a request. It was a vow. It was a brand. "You try that again," he whispered, his voice deadly quiet. "And I will tie you to this cot. You are mine, Cora. That means you stay. That means you trust me. You want forever." He shook her, gently. "You got it. You got all of it. The good, the bad, and the blood. You do not get to choose." He let her go, his hand dropping as if burned. He turned away from her, his body still shaking. He grabbed a fresh wool shirt and pulled it on, then sat in his chair by the fire, his back to her. He picked up his rifle and began to clean it, his movements jerky from the tremors. She lay in the bed, wrapped in every warm thing he owned, and she watched the rigid, furious line of his back. She had run to save him from violence, and in doing so, had almost killed them both with the cold. She had failed. The storm lasted for 2 days. They were prisoners in the cabin. The wind shrieked, and the snow piled up against the windows, sealing them in. The fury bled out of Elias, leaving behind a vast, bone-deep weariness. He tended her. He forced hot broth between her lips. He put more salve on her hands, which were raw again. He did not speak. On the second night, the storm quieted. The silence in the cabin was as deep as the snow outside. Cora was in his bed, her body still aching. He had not slept. He had sat in the chair, the rifle across his lap, watching the fire, watching her. He stood up. He walked to the cot. She tensed. He did not speak. He just pulled back the mountain of furs and slid in beside her. He lay on his back, his body rigid, staring at the roof beams. She lay on her side, not touching him.
Finally,
She whispered into the dark.
I am sorry, Elias. I was so afraid.
He was silent for a long time. Then he sighed, a long, shuddering breath.
I was afraid, too, when I saw you in the snow.
He turned on his side, facing her. In the faint light from the fire's embers, she could see his face. The anger was gone. There was just him. You are mine, he whispered again. But it was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, like saying, this is my hand.
Yes,
she whispered back. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers gentle, tracing the line of her jaw.
Then stay.
She moved, closing the small space between them. She put her head on his shoulder, her arm across his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight, as if he was afraid she might dissolve and blow away like the snow. He held her. She was not just a body he was warming. She was not just a woman he desired. She was the thing he had pulled back from the cold. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of before. It was slow. It was a promise. It was a sealing. They made love. It was not the frantic, needful coupling of that first night. It was quiet. It was deep. It was the furthest thing from the violence she had run from. It was not about need, or even safety. It was about love. A hard, real, stubborn love that had survived a blizzard. It was two broken people choosing to be whole, together. In the aftermath, they slept, truly slept, tangled in each other's arms, while the mountain was silent and white outside. A week passed. The snow melted under a strong sun. The world was clean, washed, and dangerous. The riders were gone, but they were not forgotten. I am going to town, Elias said one morning. He was packing a bag. We need flour, salt, and I need news. Cora felt the cold spike of fear. I will come. No, you will stay. You will bar the door. You will shoot anything that is not me. He said it calmly. He handed her the smaller rifle. You know how to use this. I showed you. She did. He had taught her.
Elias, they will be looking for you, for me.
Let them look, he said.
He kissed her, a hard, brief kiss. I will be back in 2 days.
She watched him walk down the valley, his long strides eating the ground. For 2 days, she was a prisoner again, but this time, she was a willing one. She kept the fire low. She did not go out, except for water. She slept with the rifle beside her. He came back on the evening of the second day. She had the door open before he even reached the porch. His face was grim.
What is it?
She asked, her hands clutching the door frame. He walked past her, dropping the heavy sacks of flour and beans on the table. He reached into his coat. You were seen. When? The day of the storm. One of them. The one on the Palomino. He rode to South Pass City. He talked. Elias threw a piece of paper onto the table. It was a new, printed poster. Wanted. For theft and flight from contract. Cora, also known as Annabelle Lee. $500 for her return to Laramie. No questions asked. $100 for information. See Harlan Maddox, The Gilded Cage, Laramie. Cora stared at her old name. Annabelle Lee. A name Harlan had given her, a name she despised.
He has posted a bounty,
She whispered.
$500. Every man in the territory will be hunting me.
Aye, Elias said. He was not looking at her. He was checking his rifle, replacing the cartridges he had used. We have to go, she said, the old panic rising. We have to go now. We can go north, to Montana. No. He snapped the chamber shut. I am done running. He turned to her. His face was calm, the calm of a man who has made a final, unbreakable decision. The mountain cannot hide us, he said. The storm saved us once. It will not save us again. H's men will be back, and now bounty hunters will come. Strangers, men who are good at it. As good as he had been.
So what do we do?
She whispered, her hands shaking. We cannot fight them all.
I can,
he said simply. But not here, not waiting. I am ending it. He slung his ammunition belt over his shoulder. He picked up his coat.
Elias, what are you doing?
I am going to Laramie. The words hit her like a slap.
No, that is suicide. He has men. He is powerful. They will kill you before you get within a mile of him.
He can try. Elias said. He slid the heavy hunting knife, her knife, the one she had frozen to, back into the sheath on his belt.
Please,
she begged, grabbing his arm. Do not go. We can live here. We can fight them. He put his hands on her shoulders. He looked into her eyes. The man from the storm was back. You stay here, he said. You bar the door. You shoot anything that is not me. I am not running, and I am not letting you run. I am going to see Mr. Maddox. You cannot kill him. It will bring the law. I am not going to kill him, Elias said, his voice cold. I am going to buy you.
Buy me? With what? We have nothing.
I have this, he said, tapping the rifle. And I have my name. I am going to make him an offer. He is a businessman. He will take it. He kissed her, hard. Bar the door! He turned and walked out. He did not look back. Cora stood in the open doorway, the reward poster fluttering on the table behind her, and watched him disappear down the trail, a lone, dark figure against the vast, unforgiving mountains. He was going to Laramie. Laramie was not a town. It was a raw, festering wound on the prairie, a place where the railroad tracks ended and the real wilderness began. It smelled of coal smoke, stale beer, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, chemical tang of new, raw lumber. It was loud, a constant clamor of iron on iron, of shouted oaths and saloon pianos that were desperately out of tune. Elias Shaw walked through it like a man visiting a foreign country, or a bad memory. His buckskins and furs, so practical on the mountain, were a costume here. Men in cheap suits and bowler hats stared at him, painted women, their faces caked with powder against the grit, watched him from alleys. He was a piece of the mountain that had broken off and rolled into town, and he unsettled them. He kept his rifle in the crook of his arm, his hand near the trigger, and no one challenged him. His pale, icy eyes, which had been softened by Cora, were now flat and hard as agate. He did not need to ask for directions. A man like Harlan Maddox, the man on the reward poster, would own the biggest, gaudiest place in town. Elias found it in 10 minutes. It was called the Gilded Cage. It was a 2-story false front building, painted a garish shade of red and gold, tacky gaslights, even in the middle of the day, burned by the bat-wing doors. It was a saloon, a gambling hall, and Elias knew, the place where Harlan Maddox kept his girls and his office. It was the hub of Laramie's shadow economy, and it was protected. A beefy man with a vacant face and a pistol on his hip stood by the doors, but he took one look at Elias, at the size of him and the coldness in his face, and he did not move to stop him. Elias pushed through the doors. The inside was dark, smelling of whiskey, sweat, and cheap perfume. A long bar ran down one side. A few miners nursed glasses, their faces gray with exhaustion. Upstairs, on a balcony, a woman in a stained silk wrapper laughed, a sound like glass breaking. Elias walked to the bar. The bartender, a thin man with a stained apron, was wiping a glass. He stopped, his hand freezing, as Elias's shadow fell over him. "Maddox," Elias said. It was not a question. The bartender swallowed.
He is busy in his office, upstairs.
"He is not busy," Elias said. He dropped a heavy leather pouch onto the wet bar. It landed with a solid, metallic clink. "Tell him Elias Shaw is here to settle a debt." The name meant something. The bartender's eyes widened. He knew the name. Everyone in the territory who dealt in bounties, in violence, in the law's gray edges, knew the name. It was a ghost story. The bounty hunter who had gone mad, or gone to ground, after the Colorado massacre.
Yes, sir, right away."
The bartender scurried away, disappearing up the stairs at the back. Elias waited. He did not drink. He did not sit. He stood in the middle of the floor, his rifle held loosely, his back to the wall. He was a wolf in a chicken coop, and every person in the room knew it. The stairs creaked. 2 men came down first. They were not bartenders. They were hard cases, hired guns, the kind of men Maddox would keep close. They wore city clothes, but their coats were cut to hang open, revealing their holsters. They flanked the staircase, their hands near their pistols. Then Harlan Maddox appeared. He was not what Elias expected. He was not a large, brutish man. He was small, almost delicate, with a round, pale face and soft hands. He wore a silk vest, a gold watch chain draped across his paunch. He looked like a banker, but his eyes were dead. They were the eyes of a man who calculates the worth of everything, especially people, and finds it all wanting.
"Mr.
Shaw," Maddox said, his voice smooth and oiled. He smiled, a thin, wet smile that did not touch his eyes. He stayed on the stairs, one level above Elias, looking down on him. "A legend, in the flesh. I thought you were dead. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "You posted a reward," Elias said, his voice a low rumble.
"For a girl, Cora."
Maddox's smile widened. "Ah, yes, Annabelle, my runaway property. You have found her? Excellent. $500 is a steep price, but she was a special girl. Bring her to me, and the money is yours." "I have not come for your money," Elias said. He pushed the leather pouch along the floor with the toe of his boot. It slid to the bottom of the stairs. "I have come to pay you." Maddox frowned, his pleasant mask slipping. "Pay me? For what?"
"The girl, Cora. She is with me now."
"You will take her name off your books. You will tear up this poster." Elias pulled the wanted poster from his coat and dropped it to the floor.
"You will forget her."
Maddox looked at the pouch, then at Elias, and he laughed. It was a high, thin, wheezing sound. "You came to buy her? You, a mountain man? What is in there? Shaw? Beaver pelts?"
"Gold,"
Elias said.
"From 3 years of trapping. It is enough."
"Enough?" Maddox laughed again.
"That girl cost me more than gold. She was an investment. She was trained. She owed me a contract."
"Her contract is with me now," Elias said. "Is that so?" Maddox descended the last step. He walked over to the pouch, looked down at it, and then, with a look of pure, theatrical contempt, he spat on it. A thick wad of tobacco juice landed on the worn leather. "She is mine," Maddox hissed, his pale face suddenly pink with anger. "She is a thief. She is a runaway. I do not care if she is with you, or the governor, or Jesus Christ himself. She belongs to me. You want to settle her debt? Fine. Bring her back here. on her hands and knees, and I will consider it. Otherwise, you and your little bag of rocks can go back up your mountain." Elias Shaw did not move. His face did not change. He had given the man his chance. He had tried the way of money. He had tried the way of words. He had known, in his heart, that it would not work. But he had to try. For Cora. "You are a fool," Elias said, his voice quiet. Maddox's face purpled. "You dare, in my... Jacob! Silas! Teach this backwoods trash what it means to..." It was over before the names were fully out of his mouth. Elias did not go for his rifle. It was too long, too slow for this range. He moved. The first guard, Silas, was reaching for his pistol. Elias crossed the 10 feet between them in 2 long strides. His left hand shot out, grabbing the man's gun hand, crushing the bones. The man screamed. Elias's right hand, balled into a fist the size of a sledgehammer, came up in a brutal, short arc, connecting with the man's jaw. The sound was a wet, heavy crack. The man's head snapped back, and he was unconscious before he hit the floor. The second guard, Jacob, was faster. He got his pistol clear of the holster. Elias was already turning. He did not try to disarm the man. He stepped inside the man's reach and drove the heel of his boot into the man's knee. The joint shattered with a sound like a branch breaking. The guard shrieked, his shot going wide, blasting a hole in the ceiling. As the man fell, Elias brought the butt of his rifle down on the man's temple. A dull, final thud. The man collapsed. 2 men, down, in less than 3 seconds. The bar was silent. The miners were frozen. Harlan Maddox stared, his mouth open, his skin the color of ash. Elias turned, slowly, to face him. He let the rifle rest, its barrel on the floor. "I tried to pay you," Elias said. Maddox whimpered. He scrambled backward, his soft hands slipping on the dusty floor. She is just a girl. You can have her, take her." "You put a price on her," Elias said, advancing. "You sent men to hunt her. You made her afraid." I will call it off. I will." Maddox crab-walked backward until he hit the bar. He was trapped. Elias reached down. He did not grab Maddox. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the bar. And then he grabbed the lit kerosene lamp from the end of the bar. This is your business," Elias said. He looked around the gaudy, cheap saloon. "This is your gilded cage." He raised his hand. Maddox flinched, expecting a blow. Elias simply poured the whiskey, not on Maddox, but over the bar, splashing the cheap liquor onto the floor, over the stairs. What are you doing?" Maddox stammered. "You are insane." "No," Elias said. "I am settling a debt." He took 1 step toward Maddox. The man cowered, holding his hands up. "Please." Elias hit him. It was not a quick blow like the ones he had given the guards. It was a measured, cold, powerful strike. His fist connected with Maddox's soft jaw, and the bone broke with a sickening, wet snap. Maddox crumpled, unconscious, a small, broken heap of silk. Elias looked at the 2 guards. They were breathing. They were bounty hunters. They had known the risk. He let them live. He turned to the whiskey-soaked bar. He held the lamp high. The miners and the bartender had already fled, scrambling out the bat-wing doors. "This is for Cora," he whispered. He dropped the lamp. The explosion of fire was instant. The whiskey ignited with a whoosh, a wall of blue and orange flame that climbed the bar and roared up the stairs. The dry, old wood of the building caught immediately. The gilded cage was tinder. Elias walked to the unconscious Harlan Maddox. He knelt beside him. He grabbed a handful of the man's silk vest and lifted his head from the floor. The heat was already intense. Smoke was filling the room. Maddox's eyes fluttered open, rolling in agony. Elias put his face inches from the man's. "Her name is Cora. She is not your property. She is not for sale." He punctuated the words with a short, brutal shake.
She is mine now, Elias snarled, his voice a low promise. And she stays free. If you send one man after her, if you speak her name, if you even think about her, I will come back, and next time, I will not bring money, and I will not leave you breathing. He dropped Maddox's head. It hit the floor with a thud. Elias Shaw stood up. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. He turned his back on the broken man and the burning building. He walked out the bat-wing doors, pushing through the smoke, into the clean, cold air of the street, just as the first screams of "Fire!" began to echo through Laramie. He did not run. He walked to his horse, untied it, and mounted. He rode out of town, heading west, a pillar of black smoke rising behind him, a signal to the whole territory that the mountain man was back. The word spread faster than the fire. It spread by telegraph, by riders, by gossips in saloons from Cheyenne to South Pass City. Elias Shaw, he is back. He walked into the gilded cage, took on Maddox's men, broke Maddox's jaw, and burned the place to the ground. For a girl, he was a hunted man again. The law in Laramie, which was owned by men like Maddox, would put a price on his head for arson and assault. But in the small, hard towns, in the mining camps, in the lonely homesteads, they whispered his name with a new kind of awe. He was not just a ghost. He was a force. He was a man who had walked into the lion's den and pulled its teeth, all for the woman he kept on his mountain. He was a man to be feared, and, for some, he was a man to be respected. Cora was half mad with fear. He had been gone 3 days. The storm was long gone. The silence of the cabin was a living, suffocating thing. She had paced. She had cleaned the rifle. She had sharpened every knife in the cabin. She had imagined 100 terrible things. Him, shot in a Laramie street. Him, hanging from a rope. Him, beaten in an alley by Maddox's men. On the evening of the 3rd day, she was standing on the porch, the rifle in her hands, straining her eyes in the dusk. She saw him, a dark shape, riding slow, coming up the valley. She almost collapsed in relief. She ran from the porch, stumbling through the mud, her heart hammering. "Elias!" He did not wave. He did not call her name. He just rode. As he got closer, she saw why. He was slouched in the saddle, his head low. His right sleeve was dark, soaked with blood from the shoulder to the cuff. His face was bruised, a long, raw cut high on his cheekbone. He looked exhausted, drained, a man who had walked through hell and brought a piece of it back with him. "Oh, God," she whispered, her relief turning to ice. He rode up to the porch and did not dismount. He just sat there, looking down at her. "It is done," he said. His voice was a dry rasp. You are bleeding," she cried, reaching for his leg. "It is not mine," he said, "not all of it." She looked closer. The blood on his sleeve was dark, but the blood on his knuckles was his own. His skin split and raw. The cut on his face was weeping. He had been in a fight, a terrible one. "Elias," she was terrified. He had killed for her, just as he had promised. The ghosts were back. He swung his leg over the saddle, his movement stiff. He nearly fell, but caught himself on the porch rail. He stood in front of her, a looming, bloody figure, smelling of smoke, sweat, and something metallic. He looked at her, his pale eyes searching her face. He was not ashamed. He was not full of grief, as he had been when he spoke of his wife. He was resolute. He was the man who had pulled her from the snow. "No one," he said, his voice raw, "touches you again." He pushed past her and stumbled into the cabin. He dropped his rifle on the table and sank into his chair, the exhaustion hitting him all at once. Cora stood in the doorway for a second, her heart at war. She was terrified of the violence, of what he had done, but she was overwhelmed by the simple, brutal fact of it. He had gone to Laramie and faced her demon. For her. She closed the door. She barred it. She turned and faced him. He was her man, bloody, broken, and hers. She went to the hearth, her hands finally steady. She put the water on to boil. She got the clean rags. She got the tin of salve. She knelt in front of him. Just as she had the night she had first touched his hand, she looked at his bruised, split-knuckled hands. "Let me," she whispered. He did not pull away. He let her. She took a wet, warm rag and began to clean the cut on his face. He hissed as the water touched the raw flesh, but he did not move. His eyes never left her. What happened?" she asked, her voice low. "I made him an offer," Elias said. "He did not take it." The bounty hunters? The men from the valley?" "They were there," he said. "They are. Not a problem anymore." Cora's hand faltered. "Killed." The word hung in the air, unspoken. He had killed them. She finished cleaning the cut on his face. She moved to his arm, carefully, gently pushing up the bloody buckskin sleeve. It was not a bullet hole, thank God. It was a long, deep gash, a knife wound, from his shoulder to his elbow. It had bled, a lot, but it was not mortal. He did this?" she asked. "One of the guards," Elias said, his voice flat. "He was quick, not quick enough." She began to clean the wound. It was deep. She would have to stitch it. She had stitched his shirts. She had never stitched a man. "Get the needle," he said, seeing her hesitation. "The one for leather, and the sinew. It will hold." She did. Her hands trembled, but she did it. She pushed the needle through his tough skin. He did not flinch. He just sat there, watching her, as she sewed his flesh back together. She was binding him to her, just as he had bound her to him. When she was done, she wrapped his arm in clean linen. She cleaned his bloody, broken hands. She put salve on the raw knuckles. It was finished. He was mended. She was still kneeling at his feet. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. He reached out, his uninjured hand, his clean hand, and touched her face. He stroked her cheek. "It is over, Cora," he whispered. "He will not come back. No one will come for that reward. It is gone. The office, it burned." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. The fire. He had burned it all away. Her name, her contract, her past. She put her hand over his. "You are home," she whispered. He pulled her up. She did not sit on his lap. She sat on the floor, leaning against his knees, her head resting on his thigh. He put his good hand on her hair, stroking it. They did not speak. They held each other. They sat by the fire, a wounded man and a saved woman, and they held on, breathing in the quiet. As the night settled over the mountain, they held each other until the fire burned low, and until the morning came. The next few weeks were not peaceful. They were poised. Elias healed. His arm was stiff, but he worked. He was not the same. He was not just a homesteader. He was a guardian. He was a soldier. He began to prepare. He did not just chop firewood. He felled trees, sharpening the ends, building a low, hidden stockade in the woods, a second line of defense. He dug pits on the main trail and filled them with sharpened stakes, covering them with flimsy branches and leaves. He set snares, but they were not for rabbits. They were thick-roped, heavy snares, designed to catch a man's ankle, to break a horse's leg. The cabin was no longer a home. It was a fortress. And Cora worked beside him. She was not the frightened girl who had stumbled out of the snow. She was not the shy woman who read poetry. She was the woman who had stitched a man's arm. She was the woman who had been bought with blood and fire. She sharpened the knives. She sat by the fire, not reading, but working a whetstone against the flat of the blades, the skinning knives, the kitchen knives, and the great, heavy hunting knife he had given her. She worked until the edges were razor-sharp, gleaming in the firelight. She practiced with the rifle. Every day,
Elias would set up targets. Pine cones, small rocks, a mark on a tree. Slow. He would coach her, his voice calm. Breathe out. Squeeze. Do not pull. The crack of the rifle echoed through the valley. She learned to load. She learned to aim. She learned to kill. They worked together. Two parts of a single, watchful machine. They were tense, waiting for the echo of his actions in Laramie. The law, or what passed for it, would come, or new bounty hunters, eager to claim the price that would surely be on his head. They were in love. They were partners. And they were preparing for a war. The waiting was a poison. It seeped into their quiet moments, turning the silence from a comfort into a taut, humming wire. Elias and Cora moved through their days. The fortress built, the knives sharp, the rifles loaded. They were bound by love, but they were held captive by the future. It was coming. They both knew it. It came not in the spring, but in the late, hard frost of autumn, when the mountain was dying, the aspens bare, and the air sharp with the promise of the first heavy snow. Elias saw them first. He was on the ridge, checking the high snares, and he saw them not as riders, but as a flaw in the landscape. 4 of them, not the hired thugs from Laramie. These men rode with a purpose. They were lean, hard, and moved like a wolf pack. They were not Maddox's men. They were professionals, drawn by the bounty that must have been placed on Elias himself. They were here for the man who had burned down the gilded cage. He did not run back to the cabin. He moved parallel to them, a ghost in the trees, until he was close enough to see their faces. They were cold-eyed, dressed in oilskin dusters, their rifles in scabbards, their pistols worn low. They were not coming to talk. He fired one shot, not at them. He fired at the granite cliff far above their heads. It was the signal. In the cabin, Cora was kneading dough, her hands white with flour. The crack of the rifle echoed, sharp and clean, not the flat boom of a hunting shot. It was a warning. Her heart stopped. Then it began to hammer, a cold, hard rhythm. She did not panic. She did not weep. She moved. She dropped the dough. She wiped her hands on her apron. She walked to the wall, took down her rifle, and checked the load. She went to the small, reinforced window that faced the trail. She laid out the extra cartridges on the sill. She barred the door, and she waited. Elias was already moving, falling back through the trees, using the land he knew. He reached the first of his deadfall traps and crouched behind a boulder. The 4 men, startled by the shot, had fanned out. They were good. They did not bunch up. They advanced, using the trees as cover. The leader, a man with a gray-white scar on his chin, motioned 2 men to flank wide, toward the stream. The other 2 came up the middle, slow and steady. The first man on the trail stepped onto the covered pit. There was a dry snap of branches, a grunt of surprise, and then a wet, terrible scream that was cut short. The man vanished. His partner dove for cover, firing blindly into the woods. "It is a trap," he yelled. Elias did not move. He let the man yell. He was breathing slow. He was not a man. He was a piece of the mountain. The 2 flankers were moving faster now, splashing through the shallow creek, trying to get behind the cabin. They burst from the trees into the small clearing. "Elias!" Cora screamed from the window. A warning. The men saw her. "In the cabin! It is the girl!" one yelled, raising his rifle. Cora had the window. It was a small hole, barely big enough for the rifle barrel. She saw the man, a dark shape against the pale sky. She remembered Elias's voice. "Breathe out. Squeeze." She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked, slamming her shoulder, the sound filling the small cabin. The man she aimed at did not fall. He yelped, grabbing his leg, and stumbled, cursing, into the mud by the creek. "She hit me! The wench hit me!" His partner returned fire. A bullet slammed into the log wall beside her head, sending splinters stinging into her cheek.
She did not flinch. She was already reloading. Elias used their distraction. He moved, rising from behind his rock like a bear, and fired. The man who had been yelling about the trap was sighting in on the cabin. Elias's bullet took him high in the chest. The man looked surprised, dropped his rifle, and fell backward without a sound. 2 down. The gray-scarred leader, who had been advancing with the man Elias just shot, was fast. He dropped, rolling, and fired from the ground. Elias felt it, a hard, white-hot punch to his left side. It was not a sting. It was a blow, like being hit with a hammer. It stole his breath. He stumbled, falling to one knee, his hand clutching his ribs. "Elias!" Cora shrieked, seeing him fall. She forgot her window. She forgot the men outside. She ran for the door. "Stay inside!" Elias roared, his voice thick with pain. He was on one knee, rifle still in hand, his side a sudden, soaking fire. He was exposed. The leader stood, leveling his rifle for the killing shot. The second flanker, the one Cora had missed, was now at the corner of the cabin. He saw Elias, exposed and kneeling. He saw Cora, frantic, at the barred door. He raised his pistol, aiming for the door, ready to shoot her the second she opened it. Cora saw him through the crack in the wood. The man at the corner. He was aiming at her. She shoved her rifle through the window, not even aiming, just pointing at the shape, and fired. The blast was deafening. The man grunted, the shot catching him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his pistol, his arm useless, and staggered back, his face a mask of shock. Elias saw his chance. The leader was still sighting on him. Elias, his ribs screaming, did not aim for the man's chest. He aimed for his head. He breathed out. He squeezed. The last man, the leader, fell. His rifle discharged into the dirt. Silence. A terrible, ringing silence, broken only by the man Cora had shot in the leg, who was moaning by the creek. The man with the shattered shoulder was staring at his own useless arm. He looked at Elias, who was now slowly, painfully, getting to his feet. He looked at the cabin. He looked at his dead leader. He turned, clutching his arm, and began to run, crashing through the woods, back down the valley. Elias let him go. A one-armed man, running. He was a message. Cora ripped the bar from the door and ran out. She did not look at the bodies. She ran to Elias, who was leaning against a pine, his face pale, his side soaked in blood. "You are hit," she whispered, her hands fluttering over the wound. "Ribs," he grunted. It is not deep." He looked at her, at the splinters on her cheek, at the wildness in her eyes. You hit him." "I hit too," she said, her voice numb. She was shaking now, the fight leaving her, a cold, terrible sickness replacing it. "Good," he said. He pushed himself off the tree. "Good girl." He looked at the man by the creek. The man was trying to crawl away. Elias walked over to him. The man looked up, his face white with terror. "Please, mercy." Elias looked down at him. He did not raise his rifle. "This is my land, my woman. You tell all of them. No one else comes here, no one." The man nodded, babbling. "I will, I swear, I will." "Go," Elias said. The man began to crawl, dragging his ruined leg through the mud, sobbing. Elias watched him go. Then he turned to Cora. "It is done, for real, this time." He took 2 steps toward her, then his knees buckled. He caught himself, but she was there, sliding under his arm, taking his weight. "Inside," she commanded, her voice no longer shaking. "Now." They left the dead. They stumbled into the cabin. She laid him on the cot. The bullet had gone in, glanced off a rib, and come out his back. It was a clean wound, but it was deep, and it was bleeding. She washed it. She bandaged it. She worked in silence, her face hard. He lay there, his teeth gritted, his hand gripping her arm. When she was done, she sat on the floor, her back against the cot, and she began to weep. She cried for the men, dead outside her door. She cried for the man who was crawling down her valley. She cried for the blood on her hands, for the smell of gunpowder that would never leave the cabin. She cried for the beautiful, high, silent mountain, which was now a graveyard. Elias let his hand rest on her head. He said nothing. He just let her cry. He understood. This was the price. They had bought there forever, and the cost was peace. They would be safe, but they would never, truly, be at peace. That night, after she had slept from exhaustion, he woke her. He was standing, his side wrapped tight. "Help me," he said. They took the shovels, in the pale moonlight. They did the grim work. They found the man Elias had shot in the chest. They dragged the other from the bottom of the trap. It was a long, terrible hour. They did not speak. They dug one large, deep hole, far from the cabin, under the oldest pines. They rolled the bodies in, one by one. They did not say a prayer. They just covered them. They covered them with dirt and rocks and pine needles until the mountain looked untouched. Cora was numb. It was just work, like hauling water, like skinning a rabbit. When they were finished, Elias stood over the mound of fresh earth. He looked at it for a long time. Cora leaned on her shovel, too tired to move, too empty to feel. Elias walked back to the cabin. He came back carrying his long rifle, the one that had killed his wife's murderers, the one that had defended his new home. He was also carrying his pistol. He walked to the grave. "Elias, what?" He said nothing. He bent down and laid the rifle on the fresh earth. He laid the pistol beside it. "No more," he whispered. To her or to the ground, she did not know. He picked up his shovel and began to bury his weapons. He buried his past. He buried the bounty hunter. He buried the part of him that lived by the gun. He chose her. He chose this. He shoveled the dirt onto the tools of his trade, burying them with the men they had killed. They walked back to the cabin, his arm around her, his side aching. They barred the door, and they fell into the bed, into a sleep so deep it was like a small death. A few days later, a lone rider came up the valley. Elias met him on the porch. He held no weapon. Cora stood in the doorway, her small rifle in her hands. The man was old, with a gray mustache and a weary face. He wore a tarnished badge. It was the sheriff from South Pass City. "Mr. Shaw," the sheriff said, not dismounting. He looked tired. "Sheriff," Elias said. The sheriff's eyes scanned the property. He saw the patched log where the bullet had hit. He saw the fresh, dark earth under the pines. He saw the grim, hard look on Cora's face. "Got 2 men in my jail," the sheriff said, rubbing his neck. "One with a shot-up leg, one with a missing arm. They tell a wild story about you and the woman." Elias said nothing. "Story is," the sheriff continued, "that 4 of them came up here. Professionals, hired to bring you in for the Laramie fire. Only 2 of them came back down." Elias waited. The sheriff sighed. "Harlan Maddox is in Cheyenne. He is a broken man, in more ways than one. No one liked him. The men who got lost up here, they were not liked either. The territory is, frankly, a quieter place without them." He looked Elias square in the eye. "I do not have the men, and I do not have the inclination to come up this high and find out what happened to 2 fools who went looking for a fight with Elias Shaw." He gathered his reins. "I am here for one reason, to tell you, this is your mountain. What happens on it, stays on it. But if you come down, if you or your woman set foot in South Pass City or Laramie, then I have to act. The law down there is a different thing." "We are not leaving," Elias said.
Good. The sheriff nodded. Stay here. Be ghosts. In a year, the world will forget. They will find other monsters to hunt and other bounties to chase. He tipped his hat. Ma'am? He turned his horse and rode away. Cora stepped onto the porch. She uncocked the rifle. She watched the law ride away, leaving them to their isolation. They were prisoners, but they were free. The mountain healed. The hard autumn gave way to a brutal winter, and the snow came, thick and heavy, burying the graves, burying the traps, burying the blood. It sealed them in. And in that isolation, in that quiet, they healed, too. Elias's side mended, leaving another scar, but he was different. With his guns buried, his hands, which had only ever destroyed or taken, now had to build. When the spring came, it was a resurrection. The snow melted, the creek ran full and clear, and the world was green. Cora went to the patch of earth by the cabin. Elias had turned the soil for her. She took a small bag of seeds she had bought. That last trip to town, she planted a garden. She pushed seeds into the dark, rich earth, carrots, peas, beans. She was planting life. Her hands, which had gripped a rifle, were now gentle. Elias was not idle. He felled new trees, not for a stockade, but for a new room. He was adding on to the cabin. He worked from sunup to sundown, the thwack of his axe and the sound of his hammer echoing through the valley. It was the sound of a home being built. One evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the peaks. The new room was finished, the walls tight, a new window cut. "We will need a proper bed," he said, his hand resting on her knee. "We will," she agreed. "In town," he said, they have a preacher, a man who says words." Cora looked at him. "We do not need a preacher. Elias, we do not need a town." "No," he agreed. He looked out at the vast, silent cathedral of the mountains. "But a man should marry his wife." "Then marry me," she said. "Here?" "Here," she said. "Tomorrow, under the pines. Just us, and them." She nodded toward the trees. "Your Anna, my past, let them all be witnesses, and then let them be." He looked at her, his love for her so vast it filled his chest. "Tomorrow," he agreed. That night, they lay in the new room. The cot was gone, replaced by a bed he had built, with a thick mattress she had sewn and stuffed with soft moss and feathers. It was quiet. The air was warm. Cora lay beside him, her head on his shoulder. She was quiet for a long time. "Elias," she whispered. "I am here." I do not want to be punished anymore." The words were so small, he almost did not hear them. He turned, pulling her closer. He looked into her eyes. He saw the last shadow of Harlan Maddox. He saw the girl who had stolen eggs. He saw the shame she had carried, the belief that all this, even his love, was just a different kind of sentence. He kissed her forehead. He kissed her eyelids. He kissed her lips. "Then I will love you instead," he whispered, his voice thick. "Every day, forever." The snow fell. It was a new winter, but it was not a prison. It was a blanket. It fell softly outside the new window, covering the mountain in a perfect, clean white. It was quiet. Inside, the cabin was warm. A low fire burned in the hearth. Cora lay in the big, soft bed. She was on her side, her hair spread over the pillow. Her hand was resting on her belly. It was no longer flat. A small, perfect, gentle curve rose under her nightgown. A new life, a new spring, coming in the dead of winter. Elias lay beside her, his back to her, their bodies fitted together. He reached back, his large, scarred hand finding hers. He laced his fingers with hers, his thumb rubbing the back of her hand. They did not speak. They did not need to. They were not a broken bounty hunter and a runaway girl. They were a husband and a wife. They were a family. The mountain was not a fortress or a prison. It was a home. They had made it. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to hear where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and connect with other listeners. Be sure to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts on Cora and Elias's journey.